Welcome to the College of Complexes. My name is Tim. I'd like to welcome all of you to our illustrious gathering tonight. The College of Complexes consists of the following format. First, there is a brief announcements period. Second, our speaker will speak, whose name is Walt Zlotow, who's going to be talking about Cuban relations. Then we're going to be going into after our speaker speaks for up to about an hour or so, we'll have our question and answer period. Then after our question and answer period, we'll then be going into our infamous rebuttal period. We'll be meeting here until about 8 o'clock tonight. We have to leave at 7:45 because the restaurant closes at 8. There are two rules to the college. One is one fool at a time, and the second is no personal attacks. All right, Charlie, as soon as I get the screen ready to share, we'll be all set. So go ahead with your announcements.
All right.
Go ahead. Just start talking, Charlie. We'll get you.
Well, get the screen up.
Well, come on. Okay, there we go.
We'll wait.
All right. All right, you got it. Okay, Charlie, keep going. Oops.
Go to the schedule.
I know. Anyway, there's our main page. Okay, Charlie, go ahead. I'll get the current schedule of speakers up. Go ahead.
Well, I'm waiting. Get the schedule there. Now scroll up. Okay, now we can begin. All right. Welcome to meeting number 3,822 of the College of Complexes, the playground for people who think. Although I'm not a capitalist, I will give an advertisement for our upcoming 6 programs. On June 21st, our own Tim Bulger will be looking at the papal encyclical Rerum Novarum on the condition of the working man and the employers, the capitalist class. It's the most famous ethical statement probably ever issued. June 21st. June 28th, we're going to look at a new leader emerging from Betrayera of West Africa, an interest in international relations. On June 28th, we go to West Africa. On July the 5th, here's truly Charles Paddock. We'll be looking at all the factors either for the invasion or the annexation of Canada by the United States. I've got a pretty good PowerPoint put together examining, and this is largely the history of Canada, which many of you may not know. On July the 12th, we'll be visited by a representative of the American Indian Association to look over the situation of Native Americans in Chicago and the United States. On July the 19th, we're going to be looking at how to get rid of the federal government. Don't pay any income taxes. Get rid of the federal welfare complex. How to get rid of the federal government, July the 19th. On July the 26th is open. If you'd like to speak, send me a title and a brief description of your presentation. On August the 2nd, we're going to be looking at the conditions historically, factors which brought down the Roman Empire, and is that happening in the United States today? So the fall of the United States, August 2nd. That leaves 4 dates open in August, 9, 16, 23, 30. Contact me if you'd like to speak. Thank you very much, Tim. Take it away.
We're going to now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Well, oh yeah, sure. Go ahead. Just grab the mic and we'll get you on cam. Just hold off right there and I'll get you on cam. Hold on.
G Information Service will be having its monthly Night with the Experts on the 26th of June. Our expert is going to be Jason Sally. He is an investigative journalist in Southern Ohio. where the United States has created a sacrifice zone to the nuclear projects that implement the War Department. So just a minute. Can I?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Picture of Jason. He's a young man, and in spite of that, he's had good. Well, he's young compared to some of us, especially me, and he has had many, many years of experience in living in Appalachia, in the Appalachia part of Ohio, and reporting there. And he's done a lot of writing on the subject of what's happening not only in Southern Ohio, not only in Southern Ohio, but in Central Ohio, because there's a new drone factory that's gone in near Columbus, which is not so good. Okay, so anyway, here we are, the 26th of June at 7. And if you want to go to this, please send an email to NEIS, which stands for Nuclear Energy Information Service, NEIS@neis.org. And my email is janbudar1@gmail.com, JANB like baby, OUDART, the numeral 1 @gmail.com. And thank you for letting me make this announcement.
Okay, now we're going to get Mr. Zlotow up. Let's give a rousing round of applause for our speaker, Walt. And when you're ready, Walt, let me know.
I'm ready.
All right, so go ahead. We'll get your PowerPoint up. Just go ahead and introduce yourself and I'll get it up.
Okay, thank you, Tim, for that introduction. And it's good to be here. I spoke a couple of months back on waging peace in an era of perpetual war, but I did that from my home on Zoom. And even though I'm 31 miles away, I thought it'd be kind of cool to be out here in person with a live audience. And I'm really glad to be here. So thank you for inviting me back. Our topic tonight is US-Cuba Relations 1898 to present, what they didn't teach us in school. A little bit about me and why this talk. I have been interested, indeed obsessed, I guess, about US-Cuba relations for 66 years now. And I can tell you the exact date when I became interested. It was January 1st, 1959, when I heard on the news that the Cuban revolutionaries had deposed the brutal and long-running Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista. And it dawned on me that I went through 8 years of grammar school and I didn't learn one thing about Cuba, not one. I was just about to graduate when that announcement came on January 1st. I was aware there was a country of Cuba. I had no idea where it was or how close it was to the US. The only thing I knew about it was that it was the home country of my favorite White Sox player, Minnie Minoso. That's it. So the news of that revolution really caught my interest, and I have been studying it now for the last 66 years. And of course, I was dismayed, and I was thrilled about the revolution because being a small D Democrat, I believe in people self-government, government deriving its consent from the governed, and certainly what was going on in Cuba was just horrendous. For over 25 years with U.S. participation. So 2 years later, we went through the Bay of Pigs crisis, which horrified me that we were trying to overthrow a new government.
Having some trouble getting it, so my apologies. Just keep talking. I'll have it ready in a minute.
A year and a half later, we have the Cuban Missile Crisis, which not only horrified me, but it terrified me because as a 17-year-old, I went through 13 days wondering if I would live through the day and whether I'd wake up the next morning when going to sleep because of nuclear war. And it was many years later, we learned that we came within an eyelash of nuclear war over the Cuban Missile Crisis.
I'm getting it up. It's just taking a minute here to get
Should I
it.
stop?
No, just keep talking.
Oh, okay. So my interest was maintained in following US-Cuba relations. And then in 1974, my brother married a Cuban exile. Her name was Mirta Nueves from the Cuban city of Camagüey. She was a middle-class school teacher, and she applied for a visa to get out of Cuba.
Sorry, just go ahead. We're having some trouble. I got it here, but it's just,
Should I stop?
no, keep going.
Okay, so
This'll have to do, I guess.
so in any event, she applied for a visa, and because she was a middle-class school teacher, they didn't want her to leave, so they sort of put her in a equivalent of a concentration camp, the communists did, for 6 months. She endured that, got her visa, came to the US, married my brother, and I learned a lot about Cuba and the Cuban people from her over the years. One thing is she spent many thousands of dollars sending food, medicine, clothing, and other items to her relatives in Cuba, as did many, many other thousands of Cubans that had fled Cuba to the United States, which was one of the ways they survived the horrendous US embargo that was imposed in 1960. Then in 2017, my wife and I took a 10-day trip to Cuba through a Rhodes Scholar people-to-people cultural exchange program. It was one of the few ways you could get to Cuba during the first Trump administration, because he cut back on travel access that Obama had opened up. And for me, it was a transformational experience. I grew to love the country of Cuba, its people, and became determined, to put my voice against the embargo, the cruel embargo, which at that time was going into its 55th year, that was hurting the Cuban people. And we could see that when we were there. We would go into stores, drug stores, and the shelves were bare, and because of the difficulty in that for them getting supplies. So that's the reason so what happened then, I came back, I was so inspired, I put this talk together in 2017, and I've been doing it periodically over the last 8 years. And each time I do, I update it for current political developments in the US-Cuba relationship.
Why is it the hell doesn't work? I just can't. I got it here, but it won't. Jesus. Go ahead.
The flash drive, or
No, it's on the computer, but PowerPoint obviously wasn't installed.
you should just open it from the flash drive.
Try this, please.
It just keep talking, Walt. We'll get this done in a minute.
Are you going to be able to flip this?
Yeah, we're gonna be just a second, okay?
Okay, I'll tell you.
We're gonna get this taken care of
Open it
right
from the
now.
flash drive,
God damn it.
and then just open it from your.
Bear with me for a minute. I'll get this done here.
What do you got to? It always works when it just opens.
Yeah, I know that. It just.
Downloaded it.
God damn it.
All messed up.
Fuck. I did not have this trouble last week. God damn it. Shit. Bear with me for a minute. We gotta stop. God damn it. God damn it. We're getting there. Keep talking, Walt. We're gonna have to keep going. I'm sorry about all the trouble.
Okay, we have 3 objectives tonight. First is to provide an overview of US-Cuba relations 1898 to 2025. Second, understand how the Cuban Revolution of 1959 was necessary and inevitable. And third, learn more about Cuba, its people, and the need for the US to end the embargo and restore normal diplomatic relations with Cuba.
Just gotta get the damn goddamn thing open here. What the hell is going on? Damn it. Unless files, my file. There we go.
It's a positive.
What the hell? Okay, we're getting there. We're getting
Flash drive.
No, I'm just getting it down dropped now. This is ridiculous, but
Website.
yeah, okay, desktop.
There it is.
Okay, right. Okay, here we go. I'm gonna use it now. All right. Okay, we got it. Okay, and then okay. I'm sorry, it's working now. Have it work in a minute. God damn it. Oh, shit, right. Slideshow. No, God damn it, no thanks. God damn it. Where is that damn thing at? Presenter view from beginning. Okay, there we go. Go. And now we'll get the Is it shared back on Zoom now? God damn it. God damn it. Come on. Share.
I'd like to know that's handy. And then with all this. There's just stars on it. We are fucking, we saw.
No, that's not it. I haven't. Got 3 versions. Okay, it's gonna take another second or two. I'm sorry.
Parker.
Yeah, well, this.
They big one. As Joe said. If you ever go to Pittsburgh. It's the way it says place.
I think this is it here. Okay, yeah, from beginning. All right, good. Okay, we're good. Yeah, you can say, yeah.
You do it.
All right, now are we ready?
Go up to the next one.
Okay. All right, keep talking.
What's that? Oh, as I mentioned, the 3 objectives were provide overview of US-Cuba relations since 1898, understand how the Cuban Revolution was necessary and inevitable, and 3, stimulate interest in learning more about Cuba, its people, and the need to normalize US-Cuba relations. Next. Next. Oh, wait, no, leave that. Actually, we're going to go back further than 1898 because throughout the 19th century, the U.S. had its eye on Cuba. He didn't come up, but that was a quote from Thomas Jefferson in 1823. There it is. I have looked upon Cuba as the most interesting addition ever to the United States.
Okay, I can.
Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson. Next.
Okay.
Why would U.S. be interested in Cuba? Because it's situated in a favorable trade lane, the confluence of the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Caribbean Sea. There you see Russia is. As an economic prize ready for conquest, it's chinchilla, fish, coffee, beans, rice, potatoes, livestock, minerals, among other things.
About a fistful away from your mouth.
Next.
Yeah, okay.
In relationship to Cuba prior to 1898, 5 presidents sought to acquire Cuba from Spain. James Polk, Franklin Pierce, James Buchanan, U.S. Grant, and William McKinley. The most possible way was in 1854 with the Ostend Manifesto. That was a diplomatic declaration that stated it was an effort by the Franklin Pierce administration to buy Cuba from Spain as a slave state for $120 million. Go back.
Jesus Christ. I'm trying to. God damn it. God damn it. I'm trying to. God.
Back.
Right there. Right there. Right there. Right there.
No, one before that.
Right here.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right there.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, we got it.
Okay, the Franklin Pierce, they tried to buy it from Spain for 120 million, and they hinted at military force if not accepted. Does that remind us of what might be going on today in the U.S. foreign policy with places like Panama and Greenland? In any event, the effort was derailed by the anti-slavery movement. The last thing they wanted was to add another slave state to the United States because there were, I think, about 600,000 blacks in Cuba that were interested in slavery. So anyway, it was the last diplomatic effort to acquire Cuba without war.
Damn it.
Now, why Spain? Well, Spain was acquired by Columbus for Spain. Cuba was acquired by Columbus for Spain in 1492, same year that he supposedly discovered America. Now, the indigenous Cubans were never happy under Spanish rule, and it took a long time, but they finally revolted against the Spanish rule in 1868. And during this time, American sentiment was wildly on the side of Cuban independence from Spain. And one of the reasons is by 1877, the US was purchasing up to 83% of their exports, so that US economic dominance weakened Cuba's ties to Spain. Now we get to the official start of this talk, which is 1898, the Spanish-American War. The US declared war on Spain on April 21st, 1898. Now, it was promoted as a mission to grant the Cubans their freedom from Spain, but the real agenda was to kick Spain out of our neighborhood, acquire economic control of Cuban wealth, and make the US an imperial power. Now, this is a little known important story in American history, but there was this titanic battle in the late 1890s between the pro-imperialists who wanted America, which was becoming a major power, to become an imperialist power with an empire. And the folks promoting imperialism were real heavyweights. Future President Teddy Roosevelt, who never met a war he didn't love. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, who later on stopped the U.S. from getting into the League of Nations after World War I. The publisher William Randolph Hearst, hugely influential, endlessly promoted U.S. imperialism in his newspapers. And then another guy that's kind of neglected nowadays in American history, Alfred Mahoney, was a naval officer and a naval historian, and he was the leading proponent, strategist of an imperial nation naval power strategy for becoming an imperial power. He wrote a famous book in 1890, The Influence of Sea Power on World History, which was hugely influential all over the world. I mean, all the great nations of Europe were reading it and using it to promote development of their navies. It was hugely read and influential in Japan, which, of course, we know what happened later on down in 1941 with the Japanese Navy. And it was very, very influential in the U.S. developing a large navy. Now, on the other side of the imperialists were the anti-imperialists. They formed the Anti-Imperialist League in June of 1898, right in the middle of the Spanish-American War. And they opposed forced expansion, which was the goal of the Spanish-American War. They said that imperialism was the antithesis of Republican governance derived from the consent of the governed. Imperialism violated every pro-democracy, pro-self-governance credo in U.S. history, such as the Declaration of Independence, Washington's Farewell Address, and Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Now, there were heavyweights, just like on the imperialist side, there were heavyweights in the anti-imperialist side. You had Mark Twain. He was probably their most prominent spokesman because of his fame as an author and a humorist. Former diplomat Senator Carl Schurz. My father went to Carl Schurz High School back in the 1920s. Former President Grover Cleveland. Three-time presidential candidate William Jennings Bryan. And Bryan, by the way, was so anti-war and anti-imperialism that he quit being Secretary of State in 1917 to protest Woodrow Wilson's march to declaring World War I, which of course he did not need to do. Labor leader Samuel Gompers and the black industrialist Andrew Carnegie. And I think there's one more. There it is, Booker T. Washington, the most prominent black leader for black advancement in the United States. What a wide spectrum of the progressive movement in America. I mean, you've got a complete list of all the different aspects of the progressive movement. Next. And by the way, the Anti-Imperialist League had over 100 chapters, one in Chicago, and over 25,000 members. But we get to the Spanish-American War, and at the time, there was a several-year lead up to the war. All this time, the journalist Hal Hearst and others were promoting going to war with Spain to kick them out of the hemisphere. And they did everything they could to not have war because they were completely outmatched. The journalist William Randolph Hearst was a primary promoter of ginning up the war in the press. He sent a reporter to Cuba saying, there's going to be a war down there, so I need you to cover it. And after a while, the reporter wrote back and said, Bill, I need to come back. There's going to be no war. He shot back, you give me the pics and I'll give you the war. And it's one of the great quotes from the war.
Yellow.
Now, we declared war on April 21st, but the lead up was, and the trigger for the war was the explosion on the USS Maine, a battleship we sent to Havana Harbor to intimidate Spain. It exploded on February 18th, 1898, killed 268 sailors. And it was blamed, I mean, in the press and in the government, it was completely blamed as sabotage by Spain. And it eventually resulted in the rush toward war was so great after that the United States declared war on April 21st. Well, it was an accidental, it was most historians consider it an accidental explosion. It was a fire in a coal bunker that ignited the ammunition in the ship. It almost certainly was not Spanish sabotage, but it fit the narrative to declare war. And that we've seen that happen more times in American history. It's standard operating procedure. Okay, so the US clobbered Spain in 4 months. It ended on August 13th of 1898. Next.
4 months, is that?
4 months, April to August.
Okay, tell us about it. Only the record from that quote out into the deepest water, sinking here.
Oh, we can get into that at the questions. So let's hold our questions and comments if we were till after the talk. Okay, so the war was successful in giving America its first empire. We got Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and Philippines from Spain. And concurrently, in July of 1898, we acquired Hawaii from initially there. We'd been working for years. Our business interests, political interests, naval interests were working to break the Hawaiian kingdom. They did in 1893, and it took 5 years till July of 98 for the annexation to be completed. So now we have empire, 5 jewels in the initial U.S. empire.
Did anybody own Hawaii?
Well, it was an independent country. It was a kingdom. Okay, so the U.S. now, we're going to focus now on Cuba because there's Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico. Those are separate stories. But regarding Cuba, the U.S. retained, they didn't give it its independence after the war. They kept it for 4 years. And during this time, there was a fierce debate between the imperialists and the anti-imperialists. And the anti-imperialists said, hey, you do what you said you do, give them their freedom. But the imperialists want to keep it as an economic prize. And in 1902, the Congress passed the Platt Amendment, which granted Cuba its independence with strings. And these were some strings. The U.S. could intervene militarily for any reason. And the U.S. acquired a 99-year lease on the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base. And here, 127 years later, we still own it. And every year we send the Cuban government a check for rent, and they tear it up in protest because they obviously are staying there is illegal. It's just not much. Small potatoes. Okay, next. Okay, now we did have military interventions in the first 20 years. A 9-year period, 06 to 09, 1912, and 1917 to 1922. And these were all designed to put down any rebellions against the friendly Cuban governments that were allowing us to exploit their economic wealth. Next. Then we get to 1924, and there's a change in the relationship. A guy named Gerardo Machado is elected president. He was very friendly to the U.S. It ushered in 9 years of relative peace. And during this time, the U.S. announced further military interventions. Renounced. And during this time, the U.S. economic control increases under the Machado and subsequent Cuban governments. Next. Then we get to another watershed year, 1933, and this is the rise of, at the time, Sergeant, later General Fulgencio Batista. He gained control of Cuba through the Sergeant's Rebellion, and his rule ushered in a quarter century of brutal rule. And during that time, the U.S. control over the Cuban economy was virtually complete. How complete? The U.S. siphoned off Cuban wealth in railroads, sugar, lands, utilities, mining, cattle industry, and oil, among others. In fact, to give you an extent to our control over the Cuban government, the U.S. State Department official in 1947 said, the U.S. ambassador to Cuba is the second most powerful, if not the most powerful person in Cuba, next to the Cuban president. So that tells you all you need to know about how we control Cuba. Now we get to our second objective, which is understand how the Cuban Revolution was necessary and inevitable. And I'd like to start off with 3 quotes. They're not up there, but I'll read them to you. Now, these are not from communists. These are not from Cubans. These are not from revolutionaries. These are from high-level Americans. I know Batista is considered by many as a son of a bitch, but U.S. interests come first. At least he was our son of a bitch. That was U.S. State Department advisor William Whelan, 1946. The corruption and brutality of Batista's government, its indifference to the people's education, medical care, housing, social economic justice, is an open invitation to rebellion, to revolution. That was historian Arthur Schlesinger, 1952. Until Castro, nearly all aid from the U.S. to Batista's government was weapons, which strengthened Batista's dictatorship and completely failed to advance the economic welfare of the Cuban people. That was Earl Smith, who was the last ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Cuba before the revolution. So now we're into the Cuban Revolution of 56 to 59, but first a prelude, 1940 to 52. Batista, after 7 years, has himself elected president, serves for 4 years. Then in 44, he decided to live the luxurious life in Florida. So he went to Florida and he ruled Cuba through his puppet leaders under his control. He returned in 52 for a second run for president, running third, knowing he's going to lose. He staged his second coup in 20 years to regain dictatorial powers. The canceled election foiled a young lawyer's run for office. His name, Fidel Castro. And by the way, Castro was not a working class guy. He wasn't from the underclass. He was from a wealthy Cuban farm family. He got radicalized in revolution while a student in law in Havana. So Castro decides to topple the Batista. So a year later, he staged a very audacious effort. It was a revolt at the Moncada Army Barracks in Santiago, the second largest military garrison in Cuba. It failed. He and his brother Raul and others were arrested, given 15-year sentences. But they were released after 2 years to diffuse rising public revulsion to Batista. All right, so Castro decides to return to topple Batista. Wait, no, we want the next one. This is the first one. So he's released from prison in November of 56. He and his revolutionaries flee to Cuba. They return to Cuba in November of 56, arrive on December 2nd. They join up with diverse Cuban revolutionary groups. Castro becomes their leader through his intelligence and charisma. And he christens the revolution the 26th of July movement, the date of the failed 53 Moncada Army Barracks revolt. 57 to 58, there's widespread attacks which weaken Batista's grip. Now, this is an extremely important event in the timeline. In February of 58, the U.S. pulled all its military aid from Batista. they knew he was eventually going down, and they wanted to distance himself from whoever was going to take power, which was they felt was inevitable. By the summer, Castro had gone on the offensive. In November, he split the country in two militarily, and then Batista flees Cuba on December 31st, 58, with $300 million in plunder.
Where?
All right, he first went to Dominican Republic, then to Portugal, and he wound up in Spain, where he died 14 years later. So the next day was the day that I learned about Cuba for the first time, not in school, but from the news. Right. U.S. reaction to the revolution. Initially, it was favorable. Ike recognized the Castro government. He saw Castro as a harbinger of democracy in Latin America, because there were problems all over Latin America with people like Batista. But by April, the U.S. became wary. Nixon said Castro must be oriented in the right direction. And there's two meanings to that: the correct direction and the right pro-business, pro-American direction. And so Castro began to initiate land reforms. And by the next year, 1960, the U.S. honeymoon with Cuba was over. Cuba now began nationalizing U.S. businesses, which had been exploiting Cuban wealth for the past 49 years. The U.S. imposed its embargo, and Ike to the CIA in March of 1960 said, develop a regime change plan for Cuba. Now, this is not unusual. The U.S. has carried out somewhere between 75 and 80 regime change operations since the end of World War II, and are now in the midst of a regime change operation in Iran. Okay, so the aftermath of all this was that we have the 61 Bay of Pigs. It was green-lighted by Kennedy 13 months after it was proposed by Ike. It was a catastrophic failure. The CIA had gone completely off the rails, thinking that once these soldiers landed, the people would revolt, which of course they had no intention of revolting against Castro. Then a year and a half later, we have the Cuban Missile Crisis, which I've referred to, where we came very close to all-out nuclear war. Now we get into a 46-year period of continuing opposition from the 62 missile crisis. But first, we got to talk about 1963, which was really an important year in this history. Here, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, as I think you know, JFK decided that he was going to end the Cold War. And he had a compatriot in Nikita Khrushchev in working to end the Cold War. And part of that was ending the Cold War and the embargo against Cuba. So all throughout 1963, he started using back-channel communications. He couldn't contact Cuba directly or Castro directly. That would have been political suicide. So he sent emissaries. In the U.S., he had a lawyer named James Donovan, and some of you may remember an ABC correspondent, Lisa Howard. So they were employed to meet with Cuban officials in New York to begin discussion detente. So then, as we get into the fall, this thing it's getting ahead of steam up. Kennedy had a new emissary. His name was Jean Daniel, a French journalist, and he said this to Jean Daniel 29 days before the assassination. There is no country where economic colonization, humiliation, and exploitation were worse than in Cuba, owing to my country's policies during the Batista regime. Batista was the incarnation of sins of the United States. Now we shall pay for those sins, and I am regarding Batista's regime, I am in complete agreement with the first Cuban revolutionaries. So that tells you how serious Kennedy was about ending the embargo and reestablishing relations with Cuba. So now, 29 days later, Daniel is in Cuba having lunch with Fidel Castro. The date is November 22nd. Castro gets a phone call. He picks up the phone, listens, puts it down, and he says, the JFK has been assassinated. I will be blamed. There will be no detente. So that was the last really good chance we had. And one of the lesser told stories of the Kennedy assassination was his effort, and he got very close to having détente with Cuba. So now we go back.
Oh. Sorry. God damn it.
One more, go back one more. So after that 63 situation, in 64, Castro reached out to LBJ. LBJ was on foreign affairs, LBJ was the antithesis of Kennedy as far as being smart and wise and doing the right thing. He rebuffed him. All the succeeding presidents did the same thing. Nixon retained a strong embargo. Ford and Carter, to their credit, both tried at detente, but Ford backed out, didn't have enough. I don't think he had enough political capital. Same thing with Carter. His attempt was foiled by the Mariel boat lift, which caused huge political trouble in the US. Oh, we go back.
I know,
Okay.
God damn it. I know.
Reagan and George H.W. Bush were both hardliners, so they tightened the embargo. Next. Then we get to Bill Clinton. Basically, he did nothing except make the embargo permanent in his last year in office. And then, of course, the George W. Bush was probably the worst of all of these administrations after Kennedy. During his 8 years, he tightened the embargo. He called Cuba an outpost of tyranny. He created a $140 million propaganda campaign against them. He tightened travel restrictions, and he created a commission for assistance to free Cuba, all designed for regime change. Now we get...
Sorry. God damn it. This is ridiculous. That's all we need there.
One more down.
Went right there.
There we go.
So can't get it. God damn it. Come on.
Okay, 2008, huge year of optimism in this scenario. In 2008, Castro resigned. He turned things over to Brother Raul. Now, you couldn't get a bigger difference between the bearded, khaki uniformed, evil-looking Castro and sweet Uncle Paul as the president of Cuba to negotiate with. So Obama's elected, and one of his first agendas is to reestablish diplomatic relations with Cuba and end the embargo. So during his first term, he eased travel restrictions. He allowed internet access to solve mutual problems. And then in his first year of the second term, he actually met with Raul Castro at the Mandela Memorial in South Africa. So the next year, they announced framework to resume diplomatic relations and eventually end the embargo. 2015, more trade is allowed. In April, Cuba is removed from the terrorist sponsor list, and in July, diplomatic relations resume. All good stuff. Next one.
Okay.
And there we have, in 2016, President Obama and Raul Castro, that's Uncle Raul, in Havana. It was the first visit by a U.S. president to Cuba in 92 years. Calvin Coolidge went there in 1924. Then we get to the first Trump administration, 17 to 21. Basically, his agenda was to undo everything that Obama did. He reimposed travel restrictions. Fortunately, I was able to get to Cuba in 2017. He increased the sanctions. Cuba was put on his troika of tyranny list with Venezuela and Nicaragua, two other countries that U.S. has tried to change their regimes. He reinstated Cuba on the state sponsor of terrorism list in his last week, and he revived the bogey of socialism, which he was throwing around all over the United States to slime anybody on the left that was opposing his policies. So overall tensions went way up under Trump. One.
So we can't go to Cuba anymore.
Yes, you can. I'll get into that. Okay, now we get to the Biden administration. And now remember, Biden was the vice president of Obama and was totally supportive of detente, but he did nothing good in his 4 years. He kept the Trump-Cuba policies in place till the last week of his presidency. And that's when he removed Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism. Going out the door, he threw him a fig leaf. He lifted some economic sanctions, but he made no effort to end the 1960 economic embargo and never even talked about it. So he really, in my opinion, was disgraceful that he turned against what he supported as an Obama vice president.
I guess.
To Trump 2.0, we're in the 5th month, and no surprise, as president-elect, he promised to take a hard stance on Cuba. He installed one of the most vociferous anti-Cuban government persons in the United States, Marco Rubio, to be Secretary of State, which of course makes that policy likely. He reinstated Cuba on the state sponsor of terrorism list for the 3rd time. He ratcheted up sanctions with a total pressure strategy so that the Cuban embargo will likely, almost certainly, assuming Trump stays in office, remain crushing the Cuban people into 2029, its 29th year.
69th year.
69th year. So what we have are 65 years of failed economic embargo. Oh, and now how has it been a failure? Well, first of all, it's never changed out the Cuban regime, which was its intention. It's cost the Cuban economy over $1 trillion during that time. Annually, it cost the US economy over $3 billion. Some quotes from good Americans. Carter said that end the embargo. Reagan's Secretary of State, George Shultz, said the embargo is insane, which is probably the most accurate of those statements. And Obama said the embargo is a failure. The UN has sought to end the embargo since 1992. 33 straight annual UN non-binding resolutions overwhelmingly approved ending the embargo. The vote last year was 187 to 2. Guess who? The US and Israel. So we back them up on genocide in Gaza, and they back us up on keeping the embargo in place. Presidential politics is a big factor in keeping the embargo. A majority of Cuban Americans still oppose lifting the embargo, and the 33 Florida electoral votes discourage any candidate from supporting the embargo's end. However, Obama won Florida twice without saying anything for keeping the embargo in place and keeping the pressure on Cuba. So he really shattered the myth, but candidates for president don't want to take any chance that supporting the end of the embargo could cost them Florida's 33 votes. So that's a huge factor in the cowardice of every presidential candidate since Barack Obama.
And move to the next slide.
Yeah. Okay, now that's the overview of the revolution. Objective 3, stimulate interest in learning more about Cuba, its people, and the need to normalize US-Cuba relations. Learn more, visit Cuba, harder but still possible under Trump restrictions. Typically, one of the few ways to do it is to go with a group such as Rhodes Scholar, there's many others, that do what's called people-to-people cultural exchange. That's something that the US government allows. Now, when we were there, we were introduced to people in all walks of life, all different occupations. We saw artistic people, and it's an absolutely fascinating experience to visit Cuba. If you want to learn more about this titanic ideological battle, philosophical battle between the imperialists and the anti-imperialists at the time of the war, I'd recommend the book, The True Flag, T.R. Mark Twain, and the Birth of American Empire by Stephen Kinzer. We should all, in whatever way we can, support efforts to end the embargo and normalize US-Cuba relations. So in summary, the US controlled, exploited Cuba for 61 years, 1898 to 1959. The Cuban Revolution of '59 was necessary and inevitable. After 65 years, the US embargo and opposition to Cuban Revolution continues. So in summary, we were not told the truth about the 1898 war that ceded Cuba to the US. We weren't told the truth about the brutal quarter-century Batista regime that allowed US to siphon off Cuban wealth. We weren't told the truth about the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis. We weren't told the truth about the need to end the cruel Cuban embargo. And perhaps our schools our media, and our government never will. That concludes my talk, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Okay, all right, I'll take questions first from our audience, and then, if somebody has something online, go ahead. Speak loudly because the microphone.
You mentioned brutal a few times. Now, my understanding is Castro was equally brutal, right? He would public executions and things like that. Who was more?
I don't think there was. Obviously, Castro had a brutal rule over Cuba, a one-man rule, a dictatorial rule. But at the same time, he probably killed many less people than Batista. John Kennedy estimated that there was over 20,000 killed by Batista. But the point is, Batista was siphoning off the wealth and doing nothing to elevate life for the Cubans, whereas Castro and his government were elevating life in universal health care, universal housing, a job for everyone, a home for everyone. So was it a democracy? No. Was it the best possible government? No. But it was, I think,
20,000 by Batista. How many did Castro cover?
Probably is in the thousands. But the scorecard is not the story. The story is that the Cuban people have always supported the Cuban government because he uplifted the entire society. And it would have been uplifted much further had we not had the embargo. The embargo attempted to get rid of the communist government for 65 years. And all it did was make life miserable for the Cuban people throughout that time.
One other quick question. People I know that are Cubans always complain about Castro took over businesses and people left Cuba because they took over property. Castro took over property and businesses, and is that why Cubans in Florida are always still have a?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the people that left were people that were middle and upper class that had much of their property confiscated. Our understanding when we visited was that rich people were able to keep one house. Everything, like if they had 5 houses, they lost 4 of the houses. They were allowed to keep one dwelling to live in. But yes, they were greatly hurt by the Cuban government, and that caused obviously
Richer folks
tremendous number to move to Florida and other places.
Can you talk about Che Guevara? He was a medical doctor, right?
Yeah, Che Guevara was, I believe, was the number 2 man in Cuba next to Castro. In fact, I think he was the one that marched into Havana with the revolutionaries when Batista left, because I think Castro was stuck at Santiago. But then I don't know how long he stayed with Castro, but he then, as I think you know, ventured out into other places in Latin America to create revolution, and the CIA got him killed in, I believe, Bolivia. So I think he was only there a couple, 2-3 years before he left, and eventually was killed by the CIA. Yes.
Okay, tell us about the Cuba and the new Pope, because Raul says he's thinking of becoming a Catholic again, since Pope Francis said that he's a communist himself. Now we've got what do we have now with this Pope? And where is it pointing, and then what direction?
I have no information. I've never heard that, and I've heard no connection between the new Pope and Cuba. So I just can't respond. I'm sorry. Jen.
Well, the question before about that, about the ship that was blown up in the harbor.
That's me.
Sank it.
I'm not aware of that at all. All I know is that it blew up, killed 268 soldiers, and was used as a trigger to declare war.
That was moved.
Yeah, I got one. What, considering all the implications of the Cuban Revolution and everything else, on the one hand, everybody talks about free healthcare, free medical care, free dental care, that life is good, but yet at the same time, we still see the country very impoverished, very things. What do you think the solutions are going to be there in Cuba?
the best thing that could happen is to end the embargo. The embargo is probably the biggest factor in oppressive poverty in Cuba. Now, when we were there, we saw earth moving equipment all over Havana because the buildings, the U.S. in the first decade after we took them over, they built all these buildings, and now 125 years later, they're falling down. There's something like 5 or 10 building collapses in Havana every day. But there's machinery and earth moving equipment, and it's from France, Italy, Germany, England, Spain, China, nothing from the US. We're just cutting our economic nose off to spite our face.
Okay, we have some questions online. Can you hand me the mic real quick?
Yeah.
All right, Charlie, and then we'll get okay, we'll get Charlie first. Actually, Charlie, go ahead with your question.
Yes, Walt, it was my understanding that the revolution from 1956 to 59 was in fact not communist, but was simply a revolution to get rid of Baptista. Is that true? There was no communism. It was not one of the goals of the revolution.
I agree with that completely. There was no, in fact, proof of that is because Eisenhower recognized the Castro government immediately, and there was no talk about him being communist or being pro-Russian. In fact, he made a visit to the U.S., I believe, in April of '59. He was interviewed on TV. He was welcomed, and the tide turned when he started land reform and appropriating U.S. businesses. Then, when the embargo came on, then he went full Monty into cooperating with Russia to replace the U.S. Goods that were denied him. So to a certain extent, I would argue that we pushed him into Russia's arms. We didn't have to do that.
What did Russia have?
Okay, no. Let's go with Kelvin next. All right, Kelvin, ask your question.
Yeah. Do you think it's mostly a question of geography that's keeping a US and Cuba apart, considering the fact that like US have had normalized relationships with countries like Vietnam, etc., where they have been to war with? Is it merely the close proximity?
All right, go ahead, Walt.
Don't know if you got that.
Are you saying is the opposition to Cuba its close proximity?
Is it mostly a question of geography? Because America's had like normalized relationships with Vietnam, which was a communist regime, etc. It doesn't seem to be averse to making deals with countries of a different ideology. Is it mostly because of its geography and the fact that they looked at Cuba as a colony?
Well, there's big differences. Vietnam did not nationalize U.S. businesses. So we never got over the fact that they appropriated U.S. businesses and put us on the brink of nuclear war. We think they put us on the brink with Russia. And being so close, it's kind of the Monroe Doctrine, where every country in Latin America has to kowtow to our political philosophy. And then you have the electoral politics. So there's a number of reasons why we will not make friends with them. We will not reestablish truly normal relationships without an embargo. And as I said before, there's virtually no presidential candidate would even consider supporting the embargo, even if there was a 1% chance that they would lose Florida's 33 electoral votes. And Trump certainly has been vociferous in keeping the embargo strong to keep that base of his in Florida intact.
Okay. Okay.
Just 2 quick questions.
All right, then we'll go him and then we'll go you next.
One is
Go ahead, Bill, and then we'll get you.
one question.
All right, hang on.
Ask a question.
Yeah, I got it.
What actually did Russia put on the Cuban country that was military when there was the missile crisis? What actually showed up there? What
This question is, what is the economic benefit of Cuba besides sugar?
As my talk showed, they have a huge number of commodities besides sugar, rice, beans, minerals, railroads. But as far as what, Russia was supporting Cuba basically from the embargo 1960 till 1991 when they collapsed. And that ushered in the special period. Once the Soviet Union collapsed, they withdrew all their support and Cuba went into tremendous poverty.
So we'll bring it there.
Okay.
Intercepted the missiles coming to Cuba during Kennedy.
Well, they were on the way and they were going to be set up. They were in process of being set up. And when they caved in, they dismantled them and sent them back to Russia.
Okay, we're going to the,
What other countries do they trade with? What did they trade with? Everybody.
Cuba?
what other countries did Cuba trade with?
Well, Cuba's trading with very many countries now. I mean, it's really only the United States that has this total embargo. So they have, but they would do much better if they could have an economic relationship with the U.S. because it would be much more valuable than from the trade they have with other countries. I don't think they represent a substantial portion of any other country's trade.
Okay, your next bet, I'm sorry. Yeah, I know. Go ahead,
You said there's the embargo.
louder, please.
The embargo was done by the US Treasury Department. And Europe could not trade with Cuba. So where are these banks, the construction material, machines you saw? When were they allowed to be traded with Italy and France and Germany? What year did that happen?
First of all, we did put sanctions on a lot of countries to not trade with Europe. So it wasn't just a U.S. embargo; it was a worldwide embargo that we set up. But there's always loopholes, and I think over time those loopholes have gotten bigger and bigger. I can't give you an exact year when that equipment started coming in, but other countries now are doing a tremendous amount of building for all these buildings in Havana that are collapsing after 100 years.
Okay, go ahead, George, and then we'll get,
Did they ever find out what was behind the Havana syndrome?
No, we were informed about that when we were there, and Cuba says that they did not do anything. Why it would be completely counterproductive for them to screw up the embassy.
Russians.
Well, the Russians were out by that time because this happened after we established diplomatic relations in 2015. It's never really been adequately explained. We say the Cubans did it. Cubans say that would be preposterous for them to do it. So at this point, we still don't know. And I don't even know if it's still a big problem.
okay,
Attack U.S. government big shots here. And it destroys the brain.
Just the media in this country.
I can't comment on the cause because I don't think it's ever been properly explained. Yes.
okay,
I heard that Batista, his real support was not so much from the United States, but from the mafia.
Well, that was a big part of it. Yes. Remember, if you have U.S. economic interests and our criminal interests, the mafia, that was their playground.
Yeah.
I think it's the Hotel Nacional was the big mafia partying place. So you had U.S. legitimate businesses completely aligned with mafiosa businesses to totally control the Cuban economy. And one of the theories in Kennedy's assassination was that the mafia got kicked out of Cuba, and they wanted to get revenge at Kennedy. Yes.
okay,
I didn't hear that.
mafia and the government were connected together from the first time they're at.
Yes, I mean, they were definitely in league. There was no conflict between legitimate businesses and mafia businesses exploiting Cuba.
Okay, Charlie, we want to get you next, and then we'll go back. All right. Charlie, go ahead.
Yes, well, with all the manufacturing of consumer goods that has left the United States, one would think the embargo would have little or no effect upon the standard of living in Cuba. Why don't they get foreign goods just like we get foreign goods?
The amount of material goods and services we could bring into Cuba that they could buy would be tremendous, regardless of how much manufacturing has left. And the other countries are not making up what they need to keep their people from living in a state of poverty.
Okay, just go ahead. Go ahead, yeah, right there. Yeah, go ahead.
Was talking about the losses of Cuba and the losses of the United States because of the embargo. And it was ambiguous because you said the Cubans are losing 300 billion a year. And then you said the United States lost $1 trillion. Is that we lost $1 trillion once?
Oh,
And how could we be losing money when we were siphoning off their resources and their manufacturing?
the 300 million was what Batista fled with. So that has nothing to do with the economic thing. But what the slide said was that over 65 years, it's estimated that the embargo has cost Cuba over $1 trillion in 65 years. But they also estimate that it's costing the US economy over $3 billion a year in potential trade with Cuba.
Okay, back there, you want to stand and just yell real quick?
So could we possibly be gaining by having an embargo anymore? Well, I know Trump has failed 6 businesses and so on, so he's not like the sharpest brain in the room, but what is the point of having an embargo anymore?
There is no point in having an embargo whatsoever. It hurts America. It hurts Cuba. It makes us look like fools because the UN votes 187-2 to end the embargo. And it's like a self-licking, they call a self-licking ice cream cone. It just keeps going on and on. And as I mentioned, there's no presidential candidate that's willing to say the embargo is stupid and must end, and I will end it if you elect me. And if he said that, he potentially could jeopardize losing Florida's 33 votes. And they don't want to take that chance, even if it's a 1% chance.
Anyway, when there's all that Cuban refugees there.
And the polling shows that the majority of the Cuban refugees in Florida like the embargo and want the government to fall. But over time, I think that has dissipated. And I think the very fact that Obama won Florida twice without saying one word against Cuba shows that that's a myth. And it's not reality, it's cowardice that prevents political candidates from opposing the embargo. Yes.
I heard that the new generation of Cubans, the kids of the businessmen, of the middle class and upper class business people that came to Florida, that they're that they have a point of view opposite their parents, and that's what I heard.
That's my understanding as well, and I believe that the opposition to Cuba and promoting the embargo is reducing every year. It's going away. So again, politicians, the presidential candidates should take that off the table and do the right thing. And if they all did, then it wouldn't hurt anybody. But I mean, Trump has been vociferous. I mean, it's been, he makes no bones about the fact that he wants to crush the Cuban economy. And he'll do nothing to improve the Cuban economy an American economy in the process.
Okay, go ahead.
You know, you read three quotes
Yes.
about, I can't remember what, but I missed this Schlesinger quote. And I wonder if you mind reading it again.
Yes.
I appreciate it. And remind us what it was about.
It's probably the most telling of the quotes because he says, and this is 7 years before the revolution, the corruption and brutality of Batista's government, its indifference to its people's education, medical care, housing, social, economic justice is an open invitation to revolution. And he said that in 1952. So the irony is, everybody knew in government that Batista had to go. And yet, once he got in and started land reform and expropriating businesses, it wasn't something for negotiation, it was all out war. I think the US still controls $6 billion in Cuban assets as an offset to the business appropriations that they're still trying to negotiate. It wasn't that much.
That developing interest. It's not someplace where it's getting interest.
That I don't know, but it was more hurting our national pride. Remember, Cuba is 1/90th the size of the United States. Its population is 3% of the United States. So we're just a bully. But we were so embarrassed and so humiliated by him having the audacity to have land reform and expropriate businesses that we made it an all-out war for 65 years now. And we almost brought the world to nuclear war over it. A country of 6 million people, totally unnecessary.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah.
All right,
Well, I've run across Cubans in the United States, and they're very angry. Why is that? They're very angry.
These were people that lost their wealth to the communist government. And that's understandable.
I think you may have turned it off by mistake.
These were people that had their land and wealth appropriated by the Castro government. And they fled to the US. So it stands to reason they would not want to have any rapprochement whatsoever with the communist government. And technically, it's still a communist government. Although after the Soviet Union collapsed, they went into what's called a special period, which was the abject poverty because they lost virtually all the aid from Russia and the starvation was rampant. And so during the special period, the Cuban government, under Fidel, began to experiment with a form of capitalism. And I believe today upwards of a third of the Cuban economy is capitalistic. One of the ways we saw that when we were there 8 years ago is that there's government-owned restaurants and private restaurants. People have a home where they live on the top floor and they have a private restaurant on the lower floor. And the food there, by the way, is much better than in the government restaurants. So we were told, don't eat at a government restaurant, go to one of these privately owned restaurants. I don't know how much capitalism they have today, but I have heard the number 1/3 mentioned.
One more question.
Okay,
Cuban doctor. Did you talk to any Cuban doctors when you were in Cuba? I mean, they send doctors all over the world, sort of like America, or used to. They've had treatments for Parkinson's that they sell to Americans, to Europeans with money. Have you run into those people at all?
We went into them, but we heard about it. I believe they've sent something like 20,000 doctors around the world, and they give them their services in exchange for goods and money. So it's a way of them pumping up their economy. And they've got so much medical resources that they're able to do that. Now, when we would drive around Havana, we would see medical facilities everywhere. I mean, we would see more medical facilities than I would see driving around the Chicago area. So this is one of the things that Batista didn't do that the Castro government did. Expand the medical care system and make it available to all. And what we were told is that everybody must have a home, everybody must have a job, everybody has free education and free medical care. They have very little money, they have very little durable goods, but they've got a safety net that over 40 million people in the US do not have.
Okay, go ahead, Jan.
Was at a meeting once where there were some young people who had gone to medical school in Cuba. And they were from the United States, but they couldn't afford medical school here. And they were somehow or other sent to Cuba. And they learned a different kind of medicine where the doctors were more, you know, you go to the doctor now and you get an x-ray, you get a CMC or whatever those things are, and you're in a machine, and then the doctor comes in with his suit and tie on and says, this is the reports of your medical, of your tests, and this is what's the matter with your blood, and this is what's the matter with your brain and heart, etc. But that's not the way they do medicine, but from what I understand.
You don't have any information on how their system might differ from ours.
To a place where there aren't facilities and to practice medicine. Yeah, it's a different.
So they have less regulation. Is that what you're saying? For your bureaucracy?
They're closer to the patient than they are to the machine.
The Parkinson's treatment it's a brain thing. It's a serotonin. No, it's they use antibodies from the knees and from the brain, and they spray it in. Well, I mean, they don't give a pill like here in America. They give pills for Parkinson's and for shaking. The big thing is shaking, so they stop the shaking. It has nothing to do with the sickness thing.
Okay,
So it's the brain that's wrong.
go ahead and answer your question, and then I think we're gonna go to rebuttals after this. So you can sit down and enjoy the stuff. Anybody else online? Okay,
Could you talk about Guantanamo,
yeah, talk about one.
the prison and the Negro?
It's a sad story. I mean, we've Guantanamo Bay for 127 years now. We use it as essentially a gulag. I mean, we put hundreds and hundreds of people from Afghanistan and Iraq that were just swept up and sent there. No charges, no trials for years. And now I believe we're still sending immigrants there, if I'm not mistaken.
Trying to.
I think it's being contested in the courts, but it's just utterly, it's dismaying that we still have, it's a stain on the American soul that we have kept Guantanamo Bay against the wishes of the Cuban government. As I mentioned, they send us a lease payment every year. We've sort of now got a perpetual lease. We send them a lease payment and they make a public viewing of the check being torn up to say that this is an illegal occupation and we're not going to accept your money.
Okay, all right, with that, now we're gonna go to rebuttals. Do you have one more question? Stand up, please, and let us
After they were embraced, they were just sent, they decided what they're going to do for the rest of the day. You're gonna work in a factory, you're gonna work either of the caravan. Well, with that, have voices. Burden themselves. Which are their area that they make difference in. That's like, they have the post of Florida. A better life.
It wouldn't surprise me if that was true. I mean, I don't know. I've not heard that, but it certainly seems plausible that the government would put restrictions on what students could, what venue they could go to after school. That's not unusual in a dictatorship, in a controlled government.
I recently read been through that well, it's great.
Two grandchildren in Germany, and when the schools are, the government is very strict that you take tests, and if you don't pass the test, you go one way, which is toward trades. If you pass the test, you can go to college. And they don't give you much choice. You have to score well enough on the test and the grade to move on to a professional college education.
Okay, Charlie, you got the last question online, or are you waiting for a rebuttal?
No, I got a question. Well,
right, hang on.
If the embargo, can I go?
Yes.
If the embargo was lifted, wouldn't the capitalists in the United States transfer industry establish sweatshops in Cuba? Is there something that would preclude it? This happened in other Caribbean islands. The capitalists go down there and set up, they move factories from the United States to engage in sweatshop working conditions. Isn't that a potential danger? Or do you think the Cubans would prohibit that from happening?
I certainly think it would be possible, and we do that in many countries around the world. Our businesses, put plants in China and other places and get the benefit of cheap labor. But I think that lifting the embargo would be more a case of bringing in goods and services from Cuba and sending them our goods and services that they need. And in the process, uplifting all of their people and helping our own economy. So I don't see any downside to ending the embargo, as you might be inferring. I'm not saying it wouldn't happen, but I don't think would be a major effect of ending the embargo. I think it would just help both economies, particularly Cuba, which is so poor. And I understand something like upwards of 11 million people have left in the last year just because of the poverty. So it's a huge problem.
You only hit one.
1 million people have left.
Well, the capitalists, at least according to Tim, the sweatshop is real good, he says. A good thing to have.
Charlie, repeat what you just said, please.
According to Tim, if they went down there and set up sweatshops, that would be good. Do you think that you said that improves the standard of living?
Certainly, I'll get into that with my rebuttal later on. I don't think it's a appropriate question for Walt to do it, but to get the sweatshop debate going, I'll address that in the rebuttal.
All right.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? If not, I think what we're gonna do is.
This is a question. When it comes to it, the run from Cuba because of the Bacardi family. Oh, it is saying that they were expropriated for them and blocking any kind of alcohol coming from Cuba.
I'm not aware of that.
There was a report on it on even 60 Minutes.
That you,
Puerto Rico, right? It was originally from Cuba. Oh, it was? Okay.
I can't comment because I don't know.
All right, now, at this point, I'm gonna take over the mic. We're gonna let you sit down, Walt, and at this point now, we're gonna go into rebuttals. If you want a rebuttal, you come up to the front and you use it. Who wants to go first? I'm gonna give everybody about 5 to 6 minutes tonight because we got a little extra time. You guys will hold off online for about 5 minutes or so. All right, come on up, sir, and let's let you speak. Get all the time you need there, George.
Well, I was just going to say that I'll talk about artificial intelligence, and it can cause a nuclear war. I want to leave this here. This new age of warfare will have normative advantages. Advances in precision technology could lead to fewer indiscriminate aerial bombings and artillery attacks, and drones can spare the lives of soldiers in combat. But the rates of civilian casualties in Gaza and Ukraine cast doubt on the notion that conflicts are becoming any less deadly overall, especially as they move into urban areas. The Israeli military has used an AI program to identify potential militants and target their homes with airstrikes in densely populated Gaza. The program has little human oversight. In the worst case scenario,
What's this to do with the subject?
would even endanger humanity. War games conducted with AI models have found that AI models tend to suddenly
What the hell is this
escalate
got to do with Cuba?
kinetic war, including nuclear war, compared to games conducted by humans. Matters can go horribly wrong if these systems were actually used. In 1983, a Soviet missile detection system falsely classified light deflected off clouds as an incoming nuclear attack. Fortunately, the Soviet army had a human soldier in charge who determined the warning was false. But in the age of AI, there might not be a human to double check the system's work. I wanted to say something about the riots in LA. I think Trump is doing the right thing by bringing out the National Guard and the Marines, because I saw 3 years
What
ago
has this got to do with Cuba?
in Minnesota and Portland, they were burning all these buildings, federal buildings.
What has this got to do with the subject?
Destroying the cities. And all he's trying to do is protect the businesses and these cities. And I think the leaders in LA are just they're just waiting to destroy. I was watching those fires. I said, why didn't they call the National Guard? Well, that's what Trump did. And I think Trump's doing some things wrong, but that thing I think he did right.
I think they figured out a way to identify people by their smartphones. So they could, send a bomb to your smartphone. GPS. They can tap into your set location, right? I think that's how these wars are being fought now, is that they tap into your GPS on your smartphone. Am I right?
That's what Israel did at the pagers.
Yeah, exactly.
They blew up the heads of the pagers in Lebanon.
Yeah, so they knew exactly where to hit. So
Regarding what George just said, and I wish he were here because I've quit calling him Frank and I remember now his name is George. But the thing I remember is the National Guard being sent into Kent State. And the National Guard troops were not trained. They were trained killers. They were trained to use their weapons to kill. And they moved into Kent State, and the students were rebelling, and perhaps maybe I don't know anything about the Kent State rebellion, but I don't know whether it was violent. But what I do understand is the students were not armed, and the National Guard was. And 4 kids got killed that day because they were shot by the National Guard. And it's not legitimate for a man in a uniform with a sidearm, with a rifle and a taser gun, to be placed in a situation where he's facing people in shorts and t-shirts and sneakers. If you're going to be ready for war, then you got to fight other people that are ready for war, but you don't go into your own country. And face people who are dressed up for a summer picnic.
Okay, who else wants to go? All right, go ahead.
Just a second.
All right.
Go
ahead. Go ahead.
In the man.
I have some reality. So I was downtown today. Well, I was an observer. So I was observing and people were coming past me like it was wall to wall people on Washington between Dearborn and State. For like I was there for almost an hour. I was there from 10:30 till almost 1 o'clock. So I saw the crowd. So look on my Facebook page. I'll put some video. Well, not the video because it's
Was there
too
any
big.
destruction or fires or anything?
No.
No, we didn't burn any cars. Sorry. We didn't burn any trucks. We didn't burn any police cars.
It was mostly peaceful.
Damn. Should have done that. We couldn't see anybody. People couldn't walk. It was so packed by people. And this went on for like an hour. So this is one of the crazier signs I found.
So it's mostly
They were-
hating on Trump, not so much immigration.
No, they don't hate the immigrants.
Well, I
They
mean,
didn't talk about the immigrants too much. Well, they said like Trump should let people in. Don't let people go. Don't let my people go. So this says Trump is not stable enough to be commander in chief, but also it has a little sign that says no kings. I took this out of the garbage actually on State Street.
you drop one.
I'll drop.
Yeah. Hold it up.
Were there speakers in the Daily Plaza?
Yeah, but I mean, we couldn't hear them. We were a block away, half a block away.
Well, as long as there wasn't any fires and violence.
There's no shooting, no National Guard. They're all in California. All the radicals. I couldn't see anybody. There were no police around. I couldn't see any police there. Well, actually, in the beginning there were the police on their bicycles all over the place.
Everybody likes this slogan. Okay.
Citizens, not subjects. People are not capitalists. Yeah, they're capitalist. People are capitalists. But actually, if you want to talk about capitalism, go to Cuba, go to medical school in Cuba. It'll be free, but you got to pay for your food. Maybe you can get some scholarship to go to school in Cuba. I found out about
These winters.
Parkinson's treatment from cubahealth.org or something, cubahealth.com or something. And they charge like 5,000, between 5 and 10,000. And then there's a zhitya, which is a Russian word for recovery or Ukrainian word for recovery. And they charge like 15 to 20,000. ZHITTYA.org. They just had a conference in Las Vegas, Nevada, and they treatment for Parkinson's. So shaking, they stopped the shaking. Well, they say it's all in the brain, and it's serotonin, the nerve, to connect the nerves together, the nerve synapse, where the nerve sends one thing to the next nerve. And Parkinson's, you eat too much sugar and the nerves don't talk to each other anymore. So my feet are dying. My feet feel like a club of, like a rock or something, and I don't have any feeling in my leg. So that's why diabetic people get their feet amputated, because they die. Their feet die, basically. They're just flesh, and there's no blood going through them, and there's no feeling. So they just take them off. but I hope I don't get that much. So maybe I'll pay some money and do something. At least it's cheaper in Cuba. But it's like 5 weeks, I think. You got to go there for 5 weeks, and they get people with money from Europe and America who have some money, pay $5,000 for treatment, and so that's pretty good. And so I got some. This morning I went to my garden. So if anybody wants any mint, it looks pretty sad now, but smells good. It smells like mint. I know mint is very popular. It spreads like capitalism, sort of. It just goes all over the world and doesn't think about anything. I mean, capitalism is yeah, it got everybody rich, but also it destroyed all the land. It destroyed. I mean, capitalism has. They thought of Roundup, which is they use it to dry out wheat. They use it, farmers use it to dry out crops. I know that's hard to imagine in a big city like Chicago, but they use 300 million pounds of it in America, Roundup. And that's capitalism. Archer Daniels Midland, Bayer's getting rich from selling Roundup. Yay, and their stock goes up. Yay, and people get sick. And people are sick from it. And, you know, they don't care. The company, Bayer says, I don't care. People getting sick, and that's capitalism. You can be a criminal and be a capitalist at the same time. That's great. That's America. So Cuba is a small country, very small, 6 million people. 11 million. And actually, it was one of the biggest slave centers in the world. Actually, slavery didn't start until people were gathered together. They had to have something for slaves to do. I mean, when they were hunter-gatherers, you can't send a slave out in the forest. Go get my berries and some bark to eat. Okay, they run out and get some berries and bark, and then they take off to Indiana. They don't come back. But capitalism needs slaves to cut the sugar cane and the process of sugar. So anyways, but Cuba isn't all bad. I think any country is going to have people watching the dissidents, calling them up on the phone and just listening to their heartbeat and harassing them and killing them every once in a while, putting them in jail once in a while. And when you get 11 million people together, it's hard to control society. So you're always going to have both people leaving the country and running away from the country because there's too much trouble. People leave America, capitalist center, they leave America because it's so great. Well, maybe it's not so great for some people. Maybe some people want to go to Cuba and live there. That's all. Thank you.
Go ahead, Joe. Go ahead. What's your favorite? When are you moving to Cuba? Have you been there? What's your favorite?
You're gonna be up there for a few minutes. Okay. Just take the time you need, Jan. We got some time. Go ahead.
Dill. Yeah. Dill's your favorite?
I'm sorry, I'm all crippled up today. This is really different. The last thing that Daniel said was about people leaving capitalism. I have friends that had relatives in Canada, and in fact, it was the husband's kids. And as soon as Trump was elected the first time, they were just out of here. You know, that was just the end. They moved to Canada. They're now citizens of Canada and so on. And I really miss them. About the protest today, I didn't go to the protest because I woke up not able hardly to walk. But I remember when Trump was first elected the first time, and we had the largest protest ever at the time. And in Chicago, it was the same situation. Yeah, me too. That was the same situation in Chicago when Daniel was talking. People couldn't move, and there was a march planned, but the places where the march was planned to go were all filled up with people. There was no place to march to because every place we would have gone to already was full of people. And so we didn't have a march because it was just a huge crowd of people and you couldn't hear the speakers. We were just out there. And I had made a sign, I'd made my own sign. It was on a piece of the foam board. And it was because when I was a small child, I was 9 years old when World War II ended. And I guess, let's see, I think that Mussolini was killed a little bit before I was born. I was born in 1937, but I know that as a child, when I would see him on newsreels, I got a certain feeling about Mussolini. And when Trump was elected, I just thought to myself, what does this guy remind me of? What is he like? What is it in my brain that is coming out? And finally one day I realized he felt the same as Mussolini to me when I was a little kid. So I made a sign that said Trump and Mussolini. And actually I had Googled it and I wasn't the only one. And so I put my sign said Trump and Mussolini, Google it. And but I couldn't find that sign to save my life this time. And if I could have found it, I might have been more enthusiastic about going downtown. I didn't even make it to Evanston because I was doing this flyer. Okay, and the meeting today or the protest today was not about immigrants. It was about protesting the idea of having a king. And that's why it was called No King's Day. It was about us, and we will not accept a king, and we will not accept a fascist America. And then Daniel and I really need to do a confab speech here. Daniel did a speech about sugar, and I read Sugar Blues by anybody whose name I can't remember, but it really, really impressed me. And the fact that Cuba became a slavery culture because of sugar is another reason to not eat sugar. Sugar is one of the roots of one of the most brutal slavery systems that ever existed. Little kids would go out, I don't know if it's still true, they would go out with these extremely sharp machetes, accidentally cut off their thumbs or their feet. These were kids and they were in there as slaves trying to wrestle down these great big sugar canes.
Wasn't it Spain who was ruling Cuba?
I don't know the details of that. When Cuba was a slave state on account of the production of sugar.
It was Spain owned them all the way from 1492 to 1898.
Yeah, okay. Well, still it was a slave state, and that was what impressed me. And then Daniel brought his mint in today, and I have to tell you a funny story. One year in my garden, I planted basil. I was really happy with my basil crop and so on, and I let it reseed the next year. The next year, it was not basil, it was mint. Basil reverts to being mint, and that was when I really learned that basil is definitely in the mint family. And I don't know. I'm through, Daniel. What did you say?
There are 1,000 kinds of mint.
Yeah, well, anyway, all I know is that my basil, when it grew up the next summer, was not basil, it was mint. Okay. Thank you for listening to this.
Okay, I'm gonna go next.
Oh, really? Really? What do you most of these things?
Always funny stuff. Nice American stuff.
I always take pictures of the side.
You know, today in Chicago, we had a number of no kings protests. We have all the veneration against the Trump administration. And we had quite a bit of traffic downtown. But there was one event that I think needs to be brought to merit. And that is today, they had one of the biggest Catholic masses they had ever. And that was at Sox, I would say, Cellular One Field with the White Sox. Sox Park. And tickets were sold for $5 a piece. And when they first went on sale on the internet, the event sold out within 45 minutes. Towards the end of that run, they were almost to $1,200 a piece. The Pope, when he was there, did not mention politics, but gave a message of encouragement, particularly young people, to start healing America, to start living and start caring for each other. And you know something? The Pope is subject to a king. And that king himself is Jesus Christ, one that I also ascribe to, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. I'll be tomorrow morning at a place called Springbrook Community Church, talking about God and talking about stuff like this. And since I've been taking my mom to Catholic Church, I've been even seeing more of it. Again, I think that one of the biggest reasons our country is the way it is because we've forgotten our basic moral character and our basic moral value, what we're seeing around the country in these recent years. We're letting the evil take its place. And when you get guys like Mr. Trump, and you get guys like him, personally, I think what we need to do is look at ourselves and make that choice to do what's right. Now, I'm not saying it's not easy, but mankind will have a propensity to do evil things unless they have a good moral code that they uphold. Well, I'm not going to tell you that the Christian way is the best way because some of you don't believe it, but I do know what we all know what it means to be a decent human being. And even with these No Kings protests, so far we haven't seen much violence, much destruction of property. There have been some incidents, yes, like the Waymo car in Los Angeles. And yes, the political power of Mr. Trump is trying to confront everybody else so he can get another big thing to get more fascist power. But if we just remember who we are as Americans, that we care about each other, that we are a nation of people who have democratic values and get along with each other, that yes, you can, that Democrats and Republicans have a lot more in common than we think. Both of us believe in the Constitution. Both of us agree that freedom's precious and that it could go at any minute. All of us has similar values of wanting our kids to grow up in a more prosperous world than we did. And these immigrants that are coming in a lot of cases, believe the same thing, or they're assimilating into being the same thing. And that, I have not liked Trump's stance against the immigrants. We have seen it before. The Irish in the early 1800s, the Chinese, many of other things. It's just a repeat of history. And normally what happens is that when Americans rise up enough, they will eventually choose the path of decency. It sometimes takes America a little bit longer to do so, but I do believe that Trump's done one good thing. He's starting to unite Americans and get them to believe in what is right, what is better, and they're starting to unite people again to put aside some of their political differences and start uniting. The enemy, my friends, is within us. We all take an oath when we enlist in the army or take public office to defend the Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. And right now, you've got some domestic people who are out to rip that document to shreds. What I'm going to say is this. The Constitution is our founding document, much like Scripture is for the Christian religion. And what, for me in my house, I'll serve the King of Kings and not King Trump. Thank you. All right, who else has got a rebuttal?
I do.
Go ahead.
Tim, a majority of Americans who were against those migrants in the 1920s, 30s, majority.
All right, we'll get up there. All right, go ahead and give your rebuttal.
We have no king. Even Trump admitted he's no king. He has to work hard to get things through. There is a king. He is not here. He's in Britain. It's called King Charles. It shows that these anti-Trumpers would glom at anything to track Trump. You are literally having Trump derangement syndrome. It's obvious every day of the week.
Yeah, he does break law. Breaks the law.
You know what?
He's taking away money from agents.
Okay, who's next? Who's next?
Good.
All right, Jake, if you want to go ahead and speak, Jake. Hang on. Jake, you got your hand up? Go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We'll get you to speak, Jake. Look, we'll be able to get everybody to hear you.
This is not a dictatorship.
All right, Jake, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Thank you for your talk. Yeah, our democracy is on the ropes right now. The other day, do you remember Alexander Haig? He's a retired general. The other day, they interviewed him on television, on late night talk show, and they interviewed him and they asked him, "What do you think about the military occupation in Los Angeles?" And he said it's very dangerous because it gives the president too much power, and it runs in the face of the Constitution. I can't remember what else he said, but that's the general gist of it. This is not coming from a leftist. This is coming from a conservative. He's a retired general. And he thinks that what Trump is doing is out of line. Trump is way out of line because he's trying to take the Constitution and rip it to shreds. And I wish there were more Republicans who were willing to stand up to him. We've seen what happened to, what's her name? Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger and others and other Republicans who tried to stand up to him. They're shunned now by the Republican Party. Republicans don't want them. In fact, they've been threatened. We've seen what happened to others who have tried to stand up to Trump. They end up being threatened. So this is not a conservative. This is a dictator. There were conservatives in Nazi Germany who stood up to Hitler. Thinking of Auerbauer, if I'm pronouncing his name right. He was a conservative member of the Reichstag. He started speaking out against Hitler because he felt that Hitler was going too far. Hitler threw him in jail, and then later on he became the first chancellor of West Germany after the war. We need more people like him here who are willing to stand up to Trump. Anyway, that's all I have to say right now. I'm writing a new musical. It's called Springtime for Donald. Kind of like the producers, bad Mel Brooks. At any rate, thank you. Okay, I'm done.
All right, Charlie, go ahead. You're next.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank our speaker for a very nice overview of the foreign affairs as it pertains to the Caribbean. I have 6 topics I will cover. The first one is most Americans have little or no working knowledge of the foreign affairs of the United States regarding this hemisphere. And I think, if anything, our scorecard is a total failure. the United States has not demonstrated any faculty for administering foreign affairs within this hemisphere that makes any sense. Seems to go all over the place. So it's not surprising that our relations regarding the Caribbean should be in the same chaotic situation here. But it's sorely needed. And we're not going to see that out of the current Secretary of State. We need a statesman to show forth. Certainly you would think anything would be better than the Spanish colonialism, but you've got to wonder if this capitalist exploitation is eminently significant. I've often wondered what there is cultural differences, significant. These are different cultures, so you have to keep that in mind. They have different attitudes towards authority in particular, and government and the state and religion as parts it plays. So it is a different thing altogether. But anyhow, thank you very much for trying to foster our knowledge of an area of our nation's history and current events. Number two, given the fact that the Cold War, I was kind of led to believe had ended, except for this Caribbean island. The Cold War is over, so I don't know why it's persisting here when it doesn't seem to be the case in Eastern Europe. Captive nations have declared their independence. I don't know if there's been recognition by the United States, but nevertheless, there's been somewhat change and transition from certainly the height of the Cold War. Why this persists has got to be asked. I think it is asked. Why does this continue, this isolation kind of conflict in a larger perspective? That was it. Did you go to the East or the West in affiliation or allegiance? An island chose to go with the other direction than the United States. And as a result, they were disciplined as a result. But that situation is over with. As a matter of fact, it's really strange when the United States, in the presence of Trump, is befriending countries such as North Korea, which is considered some of a brutal dictatorship in some respects by some. Certainly nothing, the policies of the Caribbean come anywhere close. Yet the President of the United States traveled and went out of his way to befriend the dictatorship of this other country. It doesn't make any sense in comparison. Number three, probably the embargo I was trying to say is probably a good thing than letting the capitalists invade that island. They were notorious in the 60s for relocating industries from the South. First, the industries moved from New England to the South and then the Middle Atlantic states. And then they relocated to the Caribbean. A large measure of the clothing industry. This has moved over to Asia since then. I believe it's capitalist exploitation. If that's what getting rid of the embargo means, I hope it remains in effect for a good many years, because the capitalists will be in there. If you drop the thing and trade restrictions and so forth, they're being there. And tomorrow, you're talking about sugar. The other thing is there's certain industries that gain, certain industries in the United States that profit by the embargo, such as the indigenous sugar industry in the United States. There is in fact an industry, and yes, they certainly do not want the embargo lifted. I don't know what other industries there are. Also, the capitalists will move into these islands to avoid unionization, and they can operate freely without adherence to law, rule, or regulation. So you've got to keep that in mind. They'd be there the next day exploiting the people of Cuba, ostensibly telling them that opening up the sweatshop is an improvement in their lives. That's what the capitalists say. All right, that's capitalism. Number 5, I got to remind you that we do have one unique feature that establishment clauses of the United States is that we maintain a separation of church and state. We do not embrace Christian ethos. We do not incorporate it in our legislation. We do not incorporate biblical or laws in that nature. We are a secular state. Thank you. And I hope we remain the same. And to tell me that the solution is we have to become more religious, no. As a matter of fact, I would say the greater, the less religion we have, probably the better, for that matter. If you're going to turn this into turning this into some sort of theocracy is going to make things better, that's whimsical. And last of all, there's a big question here about whether or not the United States Army should be used in any capacity within the borders of the United States. Another thing is, does the United States government have a civilian police force? There's a lot of concern here that the Justice Department, in the beginning of the FBI, there was much concern about what FBI agents could or could not do. In fact, in the beginning, they weren't allowed to carry weapons and things like that. Very limited jurisdiction. Now they can only enter in, I believe, if there is commission of a federal crime. So you have to watch out that you don't turn this country into a police state. And if you don't recognize that, don't call it Trumpism. He's turning it into a police state. He's using the Department of Homeland Security as his own private police force. Now he wants to use the U.S. Army to instill, yes, we have for reasons of security. George, we've got to, for security. Therefore, I'm going to send an army to take over your city. Thank you, stay out. We don't want the U.S. Army occupation in our cities. If you don't recognize that, I've got to wonder where you're at. And if you don't think out against it, why not? You're turning this into a police state. And the last thing is, Trump has just done this. He's ordered the Justice Department, it was referenced briefly, to focus on anybody who's outspoken against him or his political opponents. So let's use the Justice Department to ostensibly come up with some criminal activity to necessitate the confinement of anyone who opposes the Trump. If you don't recognize that, you should have been out there today. That's what he's doing. An excuse? Yes, if he's taking up, send the army to one city, he'll send them into any other city, 10 cities. Oh my God, there's a sufficient degree justification. Send the U.S. Army to take over your neighborhood. For your safety, of course. If you believe that, go ahead. Anyhow, thank you very much. I didn't know there was a Cuban Revolution in 1698, which coincides with the revolution that took place in the Southwest when the Pueblo revolt. I didn't know there had been an insurrection at that period of time. Anyhow, thank you very much for your bringing us up to date with events in Cuba. Thank you. Come again.
Okay, anybody else want to speak? If not, we'll let her, go ahead.
Thanks to the speaker for showing up.
Hang on, Mike. Hold on.
Anyway, I heard this thing on, now I don't trust PBS anymore or any American media, especially electronic, and nobody should. But I
Why?
heard this interesting theory about Trump trying to incite violence. The problem is, and I don't know if anybody's heard this, Dan, that if he can get big riots, big fires, big protests, he could claim, what's the law? Insurrection clause or something. Or so that would enable him to be king. So yeah. And I heard this from the PBS NewsHour, which is half woke. But I thought, well, that's interesting. Maybe he does want to have a lot of violence and protests and fires and everything else, and then he gets to claim. What's the law, Russ? You know that.
Insurrection. It's
An insurrection, huh?
Rebellion and insurrection.
But some kind of rule where he gets to be in charge forever. Because
Yeah, some late 1790 law about insurrection.
insurrection clause,
Yes.
and that makes him king, a dictator, what have you, and
Great dictator.
the great dictator, and that'll keep him in office until I guess he dies. So I think he wants to have this discourse and problems and riots. So he might be instigating this, right? Anyway, that's my thing on Trump. Dan says I'm going to trust Dan more than the media's. He said he didn't see any fires or any violence, I guess. The media always promotes violence and fires and wars. Oh, man, they push wars on everybody. So, you can't trust American media. Speaking of American media, I'm telling my friends, get the hell of Twitter and Facebook and most of these social medias, because you think surveillance society has been bad. Trump and everybody else in these corporations know everything about you through Facebook or everything they can, and Twitter. I always thought Twitter was
Weren't you thrown out of Facebook?
The one-way communication, right?
Weren't you thrown out of Facebook?
Facebook, and get off of Twitter because you can be managed, socially programmed.
What are you talking about?
Surveilled, worse than ever. They're bad companies. They have no.
You were thrown out of Facebook because you couldn't comply with the rules.
What is it? Cuba? I'm just filling a little bit of time. So getting back to Cuba, which I was married to a South American for 12 lovely years. So I know a little bit about the Caribbean. And actually, Cuba's pretty small. I mean, they're smaller than Illinois. And I think their main export has been tobacco and sugarcane. I mean, it's not like oil, We fight wars over oil. I don't think we're going to fight wars over sugarcane.
Cigars.
See, I don't think we're going to fight wars over cigars. Anyway, everybody thinks America's that important. America is losing more and more importance every year. Why would Cuba give it to America? Just do trade with Europe. They're more honest. They're less corrupt. The heck with America. People don't need America. Countries don't need America, right? Does Cuba need America that much? They don't need us.
Yeah, Beth, my name is Tim
So we think Newark,
Roger's son. She's
Chrysler, big as a whale. When I go to Havana.
Church at 10:45.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna take her to the 11.
Heads up.
If you got nothing to say, why don't go home?
Turn up Charlie's volume.
Yeah, let her know with the message too, please, because I haven't seen it.
Anyway, so for showing up. I don't know if you're an expert in any
Okay,
other
yeah.
topic.
No color up either.
That Cuba, you know, one thing about Charlie.
All right, thanks.
What is
He
this
is
guy
putting
talking
in
about?
the
He's not talking
footwork.
about anything.
Charlie, what's Charlie saying?
Sit
Well,
down.
that's it.
He's telling me to shut up.
Yeah,
Sit down.
It's about him.
You're just rambling.
What?
You're just rambling. Sit down.
I was going to say something nice about you.
Charlie, let him finish, please.
Yeah.
How much more time do I have?
Take what you need, Mike.
I was going to say
not
this about
talking
Charlie
about
is he is putting in the time and getting good quality speakers and authors. And I find it worthwhile. Russ comes, Dan comes a lot. Jan, you're coming every time. I would rather have 10 or 15 good quality audience and Zoom people or 20 than, you know, a whole room full like we used to have and everybody just came here to eat. They didn't listen. So I'd rather have quality. So we've had some really, so Charlie, you've been getting good speakers. It keeps me coming. And thanks.
All right, Walt, you got the final word, and then we'll adjourn. Let's give Walt another round of applause, please. You get
Again,
the
Tim
final.
and Charlie, thank you very much for inviting me back. It was a real pleasure. I really enjoy giving this talk because what I find is that many of the people that attend are not aware of all the ramifications that have gone on between US and Cuba since the War of 1898. They're still not really teaching it in school. And so one of my missions in life is to give this talk wherever I can and spread the word that we need to both get educated and speak out against the embargo, which is in its 67th year now. And I'm hoping I live long enough to see it end. So again, thank you for having me and hope to be here again.
Thank you. Yay.
Okay. Seeing as how there's no more speakers and that we're done, I'm going to officially call the College of Complexes tonight adjourned. Everybody have a good night. We appreciate all of you coming, especially those on Zoom too as well. With that, the College of Complex tonight is adjourned.
Hey.